Imagine this. It's 1997. A company that was once the most valuable in America is now on the verge of bankruptcy. Its stock has crashed by 80%. It has maybe 90 days of cash left. Everyone on Wall Street has already written the obituary. And then, a man walks back in. The same man who was fired from that company 12 years earlier. He brings with him a technology that he built in exile. And he sells it to the dying company for just $10. $10. Not 10 million, not 10,000. $10 and a seat at the table. That $10 deal would eventually be worth over $7 billion. And it saved the company that would go on to become the most valuable corporation in human history. Welcome to the Money Facts Lab. I'm your host. And today, we're going to follow the money behind the most unexpected comeback deal of the 20th century. To understand the deal, you have to understand how bad things really were. In 1985, Apple's board made a decision that shocked the tech world. They forced out Steve Jobs, the co-founder, the visionary, the guy who literally started the company in a garage. The board thought Jobs was too difficult, too chaotic, too expensive to deal with, so he left. And Apple continued for a while. During the late 80s and early 90s, Apple released product after product that flopped. The Newton personal assistant, a disaster. The Performa line, confusing and overpriced. The company was scattered, unfocused, burning through cash. Between 1992 and 1997, Apple's stock fell from around $70 per share to under $14. Revenue dropped. Market share collapsed. Microsoft Windows was dominating. Apple went from controlling 16% of the PC market to just 3%. By 1997, Apple was losing roughly $1 billion per year. $1 billion gone. Every 12 months. The CEO at the time, Gil Amelio, was running out of ideas. Apple needed a new operating system. Its core software was outdated, unable to compete with Windows. And they had to find one, fast. That's when someone at Apple made a phone call. After leaving Apple, Steve Jobs didn't disappear. He did what great entrepreneurs do when they get knocked down. He built something. In 1985, Jobs founded a company called Next, a high-end computer company aimed at universities and businesses. The machines were beautiful, powerful, and way ahead of their time. In fact, the very first web browser in history, the one that gave birth to the internet as we know it, was developed on a Next computer by Tim Berners-Lee at CERN in 1990. Think about that. The World Wide Web was born on a Steve Jobs machine. But Next struggled commercially. The computers were too expensive, starting at $6,500 in 1989 money. Regular consumers couldn't afford them. Eventually, Jobs shut down the hardware division. What remained, though, was gold. Next step, an extraordinarily advanced operating system, clean, stable, modern. Software developers loved it. It was, in many ways, the future of computing. And Apple, desperate for exactly that kind of future, came knocking. In December 1996, Apple announced it would acquire Next for $429 million. But here's the part that most people don't know. And the part that makes this story a masterclass in financial negotiation. Jobs structured the deal so that he personally received around $100 million in Apple stock. But beyond the financial terms, Jobs negotiated something far more valuable, a seat on Apple's board, a role as an advisor, and a path back to power. The symbolic price? $10. A token payment, a signal that this wasn't just a transaction, it was a coronation. Within months of the acquisition, Apple's board fired Gil Amelio. Jobs stepped in as interim CEO. What happened next was nothing short of extraordinary. Jobs immediately cut Apple's product line from 350 products down to just 10. He eliminated everything that wasn't essential. He canceled projects. He laid off thousands of employees. He struck a controversial deal with Microsoft, Apple's supposed arch enemy, getting a $150 million investment in exchange for keeping Microsoft Office on Mac. Then came the products. 1998, the iMac. Apple sold 800,000 units in the first 5 months. 2001, the iPod. a pocket-sized music player that redefined the entire music industry. 2003, iTunes Store. Apple became a music retailer overnight. 2007, the iPhone, the device that changed everything. In 1997, Apple's market value was approximately $3 billion. By 2011, when Steve Jobs passed away, it had grown to $350 billion. By 2018, Apple became the first company in history to be valued at $1 trillion. Today, Apple is worth over $3 trillion. All of that, tracing back to a $429 million acquisition and a symbolic $10 deal. So what does this story actually teach us about money? Let me break it down into 3 lessons you can apply to your own financial life, starting today. Lesson 1. The best deals aren't always the most expensive ones. Apple paid $429 million for Next. But what they were really buying wasn't the hardware, it was the operating system, and the man who came with it. When you invest, always ask, what's the real asset here? What am I actually paying for? Lesson 2. Failure is not the end of the financial story. Steve Jobs was fired. Next nearly failed. Apple was bankrupt. Every single player in this story had massive setbacks, but those setbacks didn't define the outcome. The direction they chose after the setback did. In personal finance, a job loss, a bad investment, a failed business, these are chapters, not the ending. Lesson 3. Timing and patience are worth more than genius. Jobs didn't rush back to Apple. He spent 12 years building Next. He built skills, technology, and perspective. When he finally returned, he had something to offer that nobody else could. In the world of investing, the greatest returns almost always go to those who wait. Patience is not passive, it's a strategy. In 1997, Apple had 90 days of cash left. One man walked back in with a $10 deal and changed the course of financial history. The next time you think an opportunity is too small, too risky, or too late, remember that story. The greatest financial comebacks don't look like victories at the start. They look like desperation. They look like a last resort. They look like a $10 handshake. I'm your host at the Money Facts Lab, where real stories teach real lessons about money. If this episode gave you something to think about, subscribe to the channel. Leave a comment telling me, what's a decision you made that looked small at the time, but turned out to be the most important thing you ever did? I'll see you in the next one.